So thank you very much for the invitation and for the presentation. We are very happy to be here today doing this training. So welcome everyone. Today we will have two parts, a short theoretical part where we will discuss the challenges and opportunities in data visualization and history. We will explain how to dance across epistemological practices and how this works in interdisciplinary research. We will look at the specifics of each of these practices: quantitative, qualitative, critical, rhetorical, and creative practices. And then we will go through some examples where we will discuss everything that we have presented before. In the second part, we will all move to a Miro board and we will work on one very specific example, working with census data. We will discuss the data collection. We will create some summary statistics using raw graphs. We will brainstorm about multivariate data glyphs. And finally, we will discuss options for data physicalization. And we will close with a final discussion and Q&A. But I would encourage you to ask questions anytime, especially during the practical part, because it will be very interactive and anyone can ask questions at any moment. So let's get started.
Yes, hello also from me. As the title already says, this is as much about data visualization as it is about history and how we can learn from each other to communicate and explore historical data. So, of course, everyone engages with data visualization in one form or another every day. So we frequently create and read statistical graphs. We usually do line graphs or histograms, bar charts, to visualize key figures like changes in volume of trade or population sizes, and so on. And these are all part of data visualization and also play their roles in history writing. So these graphs make it easy to communicate an idea and to see outliers and general trends in the data. And when it comes to the historical side of this, there are some things that historians pay special attention to, and that's, of course, the source criticism and the changing historical context and things like terminology that's changing over time, changing meaning over time, but also country borders change and persons' names are not always written in the same way. So we are confronted with frequently having gaps in the data that's available in the archives. Or you have to combine data sets from different sources, and there's also plenty of information that are impossible to transform into numbers. And all these create challenges that do not necessarily need to be seen only as obstacles, but have value in themselves. And most importantly, we can adapt to them. I'll give over to Ida.
And one way to address these challenges, what we want to propose in this presentation and in our practice, is to combine different forms of visualization that are run across the entire epistemological axis. So we are very used to work in different specific practices, either qualitative or creative or critical, rhetorical. But here we want to encourage people to try different things, because data visualization has those characteristics that allow us to try many, many different things. There are methods that are available in every practice. And this is a great tool to support interdisciplinary work, as we will see in some of the examples from our own practice. Of course, we want to make clear that there are no rigid boundaries between these practices, and we will find different questions in different scenarios. But the idea here is that we want everyone to make the effort to ask different types of questions, because these different types of questions will lead us to use multiple methods of data visualization. That means that if we are used to work with quantitative methods, we will be asking questions like how many, how often, what is the trend, how do two variables relate to each other, and so on. In qualitative practices, we would be asking questions like, how is it like? How does this happen? How do people experience it? What are different points of view? In a critical rhetorical approach, it will be more about the interpretation, or what does something really mean, what are the underlying values, or which perspectives are included and excluded. And in a more creative practice, it will be about the feelings of the individuals, the different experiences, the impact of the making in the outcome, and many, many more questions. So the idea is, if we are used to working with quantitative methods, let's try a bit to ask questions from the other approaches. And if we are used to the creative, let's try to push a bit the quantitative and see what happens with our research questions. So next, we are going to present a set of characteristics that are predominantly found in data visualization methods associated with each type of practice. This, of course, doesn't mean that we will not find a combination of them in the examples, as we promote actually in this presentation.
So the first one would be the quantitative practices. And in these, the goal is usually to visualize summary metrics, trends, and relationships between our variables. These are usually addressed by the standard graphs that I already mentioned, that we are all used to creating and reading, and also can expect the readers to understand them without having to add too many elaborate explanations. And for these, one should really focus on communicating only the key insights and highlight the part that is supporting the narrative at a quick glance. This also means that there cannot be too much context or mixed variables in one single graph. So for creating such quantitative focused visualizations, there are many tools available, including some proprietaries, but also some open source, as well as tools that do not even require any coding skills to use. And since we are all used to seeing and creating them, we also can expect the readers to understand them, which is different for the next ones that are following. Maybe go to the qualitative practices. Because for those, here the numbers are not central. The precise results of your findings are not as crucial. And we focus more on topics, detailed explanations of findings, and even connections between them. So they can communicate multiple messages in one representation, and they can easily layer different types or even contrasting information and invite the readers to explore them. For these, context plays a much more important role than for the quantitative graphs. And if it's still unclear what we mean with this, we will show some examples of qualitative leaning practices later on.
Okay, the next one will be the critical and rhetorical practice. In this case, in addition to context that has already been mentioned, we want to make explicit and criticize the entire process from the data collection and even before until the data visualization that we are showing as a result. This critical reflection can be grounded in different humanities theories, semiotics, critical theory, hermeneutics, and digital hermeneutics, among many others. To interpret data visually, we need to design visual encodings for interpretation. That this is not something we find often, and is not something that is standardized already. So this will mean that we need visual vocabularies for relevance, ambiguity, uncertainty, contradiction, and these kind of variables. We can also use standard statistical graphs like a timeline and modify their elements for interpretative purposes. That would be, for example, using the tick marks and drawing them close together to visualize acceleration, or folding axes to visualize temporality, for example. There are only tools developed for specific research case studies, so we don't have anything that is extended to general use as far as we know. So the only alternatives are either doing it offline or using programming libraries, like for web development, like D3GS. And finally, we have the creative practices. In creative practices, we can leverage as well standard graphs and modify them to add a rhetorical impact, or we can simply define absolutely customized representations that are adapted to our data, our objectives, and our use case. In the case that we define new visual vocabularies, we always have to include a how to read section in the visualization. Because when we use standard charts like a pie chart or a scatter plot, we assume that people knows how to read it. It's not necessarily true because there is always a data literacy barrier, as we will see after, but it's in a standard chart, so the audience should know how to read it. However, if we define a multivariate data glyph with our own visual encoding, the how to read is the first step to approach the visualization. Here, the aim is no longer to read something very quickly and with the maximum accuracy. That's not the priority. The priority is to allow the reader to explore a visualization at their own pace. Creative approaches are often paired with granularity and extensive context as well. And the way discussing the tools, how this happens very often is that the data visualization practitioners, they use standard charts and then they modify them using design or illustration tools. So for example, using tools like the one we will use in the practical part, raw graphs, exporting the graph as a vector file and then modifying it in a tool like Illustrator or any other design tool. Alternatively, for online visualizations and interactive options, again, this would require programming. So what does this look like through some specific examples? In the next few minutes, we have collected some data visualization examples from our own practices and from our colleagues at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History, and we will discuss some of these features applied to the visualizations.
Yeah, so start with the first example that came out of a project, the project Viz Your PhD, where either two other PhD students and myself visualized some of the data that we had used in our dissertations. And we wanted to make it more accessible to wider audience and have some interactive elements to it. So in my case, I was studying the social composition and migration movements of the industrial city of Esch in Luxembourg at the beginning of the 20th century. But I found that there was a gap in the census data for a very crucial time period with a lot of changes. So I experimented with using the information that could be found in the civil birth and marriage registers, like the birthplaces of both marriage partners, the professions of the fathers of newborns, and the rate of legitimate and illegitimate children being born, just to get an image of how a population developed during that time period. So we refer to a mix of qualitative and quantitative practices. So it's a mix of line graphs, bar charts, which lean more towards the quantitative practice, only highlighting one summarized value per year, and on the other hand, you have some heat maps and flow maps that show more granular data, like every individual person's birthplace in a year, every individual person that was married in Ash during a year, and then create a general overview that's understandable at a glance. But each data point can also be explored interactively and individually. Yeah, if you want to know more, we have the links with tiny URLs here. Then.
If I might add something about using the different approaches, normally when you look at this kind of visualization that are mostly quantitative and qualitative analysis, it's very rare to see included in the visualizations the historical context, the data source criticism, the microhistory, and all the elements that Daniel and the other researchers included in this project. Okay. The next example is Framing Luxembourg. Framing Luxembourg is a virtual exhibition that visualizes a timeline of the history of public statistics in Luxembourg through statistical charts, and it uses a data storytelling. This is again an example of a very quantitative analysis, but that is very supported by historical sources and contexts that are shown throughout the entire data storytelling. A third example, we are going quite quick through the examples because we wanted to show you a few different things, but of course you can take the time to explore them afterwards if you wish. All the links, all the references to the articles have been included. The next example is from the project Minute Stories. That was a public history project in which Daniel also participated. And they created many different stories to communicate about the history of the industrial history of Luxembourg to the general public. And I participated in a data story called Air Pollution Visualized, together with Dagny Orich and Jens van de Maele, that are a historian and a researcher in environmental cheminformatics. And we also work with industrial engineers. And what we did here is we created contour plots to visualize the level and the reach of dust pollution around the Belval factory. But this was based on a dispersion model from industrial engineering that didn't use historical data directly, but only the parameters of the model were based on historical sources. So the historical data was actually simulated for the visualization. And the kind of sources that we used were newspapers, meteorological data, volumes of production of the factories from the industrial archives, and so on and so forth. So this was a visualization based on simulated data. And even though it was a very quantitative method, the final result is a qualitative analysis because it focuses on how the pollution is spread and how it changed over time. I invite you to explore all the Minute stories because they are fantastic. And there is also an article about this one specifically. Our next example is the fingerprint of the Journal of Digital History. The Journal of Digital History is also a research journal from the C to the H, where the authors can publish Jupyter notebooks. So it's a bit different from the typical journals because you can submit code and data embedded in your work. And the article fingerprint is a visualization of every Jupyter notebook file where each cell represents as a dot on the circle, more or less distant to the center based on the number of characters it contains. And the color encodes the type of the content in the cell. So is it narrative? Is it hermeneutic? Is it code and data? So very quickly, you can see what is the content of each of the articles and how they compare to each other. Our next example is moving towards the critical and creative practices. It's an example from the Lux Time Machine project. In the Lux Time Machine, the Lux Time Machine was a collaboration between researchers in ecohydrology, environmental cheminformatics, data visualization, and history. And throughout the entire project, we were testing how data visualization can be used as a tool to support the interdisciplinary practices. And one of the things that we wanted to work on was how do we visualize this negotiation that is taking place? We selected this visualization that uses a custom visual encoding. So we layer colored circles representing the disciplines involved in the project, the size of which is the perceived relevance, so a very abstract variable by the different participants at 3 points of time. And here we are using a visualization that includes a critical reflection. So The normal visualization we would use in this case, it would be, for example, a Gantt chart, that it would be a lot more simplified, and it wouldn't contain any of these negotiation factors. And for example, here, the irregular connections between the topics gave us a lot of freedom to add context and comments and why this changed and what happened here. So if we look at the visualization, we see that in January 2021, when the project started, we had plenty of different topics and they were very disciplinary. So the dots don't have many colors because everyone was proposing their own thing. And then there was a negotiation period where things were merging. We started to work interdisciplinary, but there were way too many topics. And towards the end of the project, we had just a few topics and way more interdisciplinary. So we understood each other and we decided how we wanted to work. The next example from the same project is a good example of creative practices. One of the biggest challenges of this project was how to communicate what were the priorities, what we could work on, what had potential, because we had a very long phase of data collection that included archival work, exploring historical sources, analyzing results from natural sciences from the labs, including additionally, we checked newspapers, we checked laws. The variety of sources was overwhelming, and we had so many topics and so many disciplines and we didn't have much time to exchange about this. We had our meetings and they had to be precise and communicate about things. So we came up with this way to communicate about potential areas of research based on the current findings. So when we depicted just the branch, it meant this is a topic we have discussed, we have research, we haven't found anything else. When we used the leafy branch, it indicated that some information had been found. Historical sources mentioning the topic, existing previous research, some literature available, something. This would be like the starting point to open the discussion. And finally, if we had a flowering branch, that was the possibility for further analysis to extend the research at that point of time. So the data could be extrapolated to the minute region. It would be for the specific period of interest, or we could project and simulate something. So this was very useful to start the conversations and focus on the important things at different points of time. But these are all data visualizations, and vision is incredibly powerful, it's the most powerful sense, but we can also leverage other senses to explore data.
And as a last example, we wanted to show this project about a single street in the city of Esch, where Ida, our colleague Joella van Donkerschoot and myself created a physicalization of census data from a single street in the year 1922, like the population in the year 1922. And an article in the Journal of the Data Visualization Society about it led to us being contacted by the NFDI for memory and to do this presentation. So we will also use this part of this data set later for the practical part. And for this project, we speculated that experiencing the census data in a physical form would allow the current residents to engage with historical data about their neighborhood in a new, creative, and playful way that would spark curiosity and questions and lead to discussions with us, the researchers. So for this, we transcribed and digitized the entries about every person and in every household from the census, and then experimented with different creative and qualitative practices to develop a custom encoding. We wanted to do physicalization without using any statistical graphs, and we wanted it to be made from material that was easily accessible and did not require an internet connection or any previous experience with the graphs that we would expect everyone to know and understand. So in the end, we settled on the idea of keeping each household as a unit, but where every individual is still visible with their profession, their nationality, their age, their gender represented. In this personal data was then connected with the living circumstances of each household by using both sides of a see-through plexiglass plane. You can see the explanation sheet for the encoding here on the right. So information concerning the housing circumstances, like the number of rooms available to each household, if they had a separate kitchen or on which floor of the house they lived, and if they were renters or homeowners were represented on the back side, basically, of the plexiglass plane. And on the other side, we also calculated new entries, like an idea of how crowded a living space was by dividing the number of inhabitants through the number of rooms available to them. Knowing that the houses pretty much all had the same size to themselves. And in fact, when we showcased this physicalization inside of a cafe in the street, we found that it was very easy to start discussions with residents about their local history and especially about migration history and their own family histories, but also about data visualization itself. So you can see that the most popping feature are the colors of the nationalities, and the nationalities were also the main topic that people wanted to talk about, and what they thought the history was and how they insert themselves now in this street that has a very long migration history. Unless Ida now wants to add a bit more, then I think we can move to the practical exercise.
Yes, because I think we have 5 minutes if people has questions before we move to the practical part. My chat has disappeared. I did something, but